Today I'm talking about why you should be reading. I'm always reading. I didn't, I don't really think about it that much because it's so much part of my life. But my mom and my grandmother and my dad, I mean, everybody read a lot. So I read a lot. Um, I mean, in my house, in my current house, and as well as my house growing up, and in my grandparents' house, there was just books everywhere. Everybody read. I mean, when I was in first grade, I hated going to school. I mean, my mom would have to drag me in there, and I would cry and whine about it. I was always scared to go to class. My grandmother was telling me a couple weeks ago, she's like 99 now. She was telling me how she remembers dropping me off at first grade and how I did not want to leave the car. I did not want to go to school. Just the idea of being forced to go listen to these people and surrounded by kids that were often mean and being told when you could eat and when you could sleep and when you could pee. I mean, all this stuff just really bothered me. So I just didn't want to go. But I remember my first grade teacher, I think her name was Mrs. Schultz. She one day at lunchtime, I was completely, I couldn't read at all. I mean, I didn't even, kindergarten, I just didn't care. I mean, I just didn't read. I wasn't reading. But she sat me down and explained to me that books or words in books were actually the thoughts of other people recorded in symbols. And that just blew me away. I was like completely fascinated by this. You mean the thoughts that are in my head could be put down on words and other people could read those? And I could read other people's words too? I mean, that was just mind blowing to me. So from that day on, I read everything. I remember driving home with my mom or my dad that day, and I was reading all the signs, and I was reading them wrong and incorrect, but every roadside sign, billboard, or whatever I saw, I was reading them all because I was like, this is what's going on. These are the instructions that everybody, this is why everybody knows more than I do, right? So it's like read, read, read. So, by the time I was in third grade, I was reading books that were probably way too advanced for me, whatever I could find on the shelf at home. I think the first major book I read, I think it was third or fourth grade, was Chesapeake by James Michener. It was this gigantic book. But the idea that somebody could put all those thoughts into one book was just incredible to me. So I read the whole thing. Now, I may not have understood half of it, but it was quite an experience growing up, learning and discovering reading. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people stop reading once they get into high school. I think the Grapes of Wrath ends their love affair with reading. Like certain books just are like, they're like, right? So people don't want to read anymore after that. But I've been reading my whole life. I'm always reading. And a lot of ideas I come up with come out of what I'm reading at the time. So it's just, and it's not always the topic I'm reading. It could be just while I'm reading, I make a connection. And that opens up an idea, a doorway for me to think of something new. But, you got to really think about it because language is really important. Like when we're crawling around on the ground when we're infants, we probably have some capacity for thought, but it's very limited, right? We don't really start to have complex thoughts until after we develop language. Then we start having complex thoughts. And I would argue that your ability to have even more abstract thoughts or to think more complex or to solve problems is directly related to the language you know. I mean, this is why poor people stay poor, or why inner city people struggle, or why certain people stay racist or stay prejudiced, or whatever the case. Why people the way they are has a lot to do with their language. It's what they learn, the words they learn growing up. And if they don't expand their minds and read more, they have a hard, they can't think beyond that. I mean, there's some cultures that never really had words for complex abstract thought in time. Like in the English language, we have 1 million words for time. We're always worried about our next appointment. We're always worried about, how many seconds. Like this video has been 5 minutes and 11 seconds so far, 12 seconds, 13 seconds, right? So we're always worried about the number of time. But in some cultures, like some island cultures, who cares, right? I can walk from one end of the island to another in less than a day. So who cares about what time it is? So punctuality is never that big a deal. But yet they have words to describe things that we don't have. So maybe they have more capacity to understand things like love or the ocean or water that we would never, or winds that we would never understand. So language definitely impacts you as a culture, as a people. Now, you're not confined by that. You're not confined by that at all. You can go read more. You can expand your language and therefore expand your mind. You're not limited. It's right there. It's available to everybody. Just go read. I would argue that reading is the answer. Like most people think that there's some silver bullet, some secret panacea out there, some solution to my problems. Honestly, if you want a better capacity to solve a capability to solve problems, then read more. If you want more capacity as a human being, then read more. If you want to be able to get to know people better and understand how they think and feel, read more. If you want to be more attractive to men or women, read more. I mean, basically, if you want to be a better person and perform better, anything better, then you should read more. Language directly increases our capability and our capacities as humans.